Thanks very much. Yes, this actually is, I think, our third Hustings meeting. We've had them for the District Council, County Council, and now the big one for the general election. And they've all been great fun, I think, even for the candidates they've been good fun. We do have some basic rules, and those rules are that the candidates will speak in order, and we will start on our left, and we'll come along, and they'll each have about 5 minutes each, and I've got Alison at the back who'll be doing the tic-tac operation, because being a man I can't both sit here and watch my watch at the same time. And we'll go all the way down, and then we'll have a question session. And you should all have had slips as you came in. If you find you've got additional questions you'd like to ask, that Roderick and others will be collecting in any others. So we'll then have question sessions, and the candidates will each have 1 minute each, and we'll start. So it goes that way with the questions and answers. And then when the question and answers finish, we'll then have a closing session, which will come in the reverse order. Now, if any of you are thinking this is the first fix of the evening as to where people are sitting, we had a draw about a quarter of an hour or so ago, and everyone pulled out a number, and that is why we've got the numbers in the way they are. To help me, we start with 1 at that end, which I know is contrary to what you might be expecting, and then through to 6. So, when it comes to questions, could you please read out the question? I'll call a name, because I hope you all put a name on. Call a name, and then if you could, we're using the microphones, we've got some roving microphones, you can use the roving microphone to answer the question. One last thing, if you look over your shoulders, no, don't look over your shoulders yet. Keith Milner is at the back filming this. If you are with somebody, you would rather look over your shoulder. Don't look over your shoulder, but it should be good. Has anyone any strong objection to being filmed so we can find a quiet corner and tuck them away there? And you're all reasonably happy to be filmed with your next door neighbour. But when I say next door neighbour, I don't mean right. On that note, I think let's get going. So the first candidate tonight is Andrew Bell, number 1, and he is on behalf of the Brexit Party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me and organising this today. It's a great honour and privilege to be here. I lived for a time in Long Crendon, quite nearby, and we used Haddenham as a station to go to all points south. And I'm going to keep this quite short because I know you want to ask questions. I think you might not be interested in sharing the questions and answering them. But I'm going to introduce very briefly what is in it's not called the manifesto, but in the contract that the Brexit Party is issued. The first item there is that 200 billion will be saved first, and most importantly, by cancelling the HS2, it will save about 100 billion or more over a few years. Secondly, a halving of overseas aid, which will generate 35 billion over, say, 5 years. And then a reduction in the amount sent to the EU, which would generate 60 billion over 5 years. That isn't a complete reduction of everything sent to the EU, because like Norway, we anticipate that there are some programs that want to continue to participate in. Then the one-off would be to withdraw our capital from the European Investment Bank and cease to participate in any of that, because it's not just 7 billion we have put up there, it's potential contingent liabilities that are absolutely massive if anything is wrong. Now, of that 200 billion, 50 would be invested in small-scale infrastructure projects, not the expressway, and some in National Health Service and other services, and some would be funding the reduction and elimination of corporation tax for 66% of companies that are earning less than making less than £10,000 profit. In addition, student loans are a mess at the moment because the interest rates have crept right up, and so the interest on them will be cancelled and that has to be funded. That broadly is it. The main purpose, of course, of the Brexit Party is to make sure we exit the EU properly, which is what people voted for. And I'm sure we're going to discuss this at much greater length later on. And we've all seen in the papers, you can't have missed it, what's been happening with the withdrawal agreement and political declaration. So I'm not going to carry on talking about that and leave it to the questions. Thank you very much.
And the next candidate is Ned Thompson, who is an independent. Ned, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ned Thompson. I'm a 19-year-old student from the University of Buckingham. I'm originally from Harrogate, but I now call this place home. I'm the only candidate who actually lives in this constituency, and of course I promise to stay here.
Can you be a bit closer to the microphone?
Is this better? Yeah? Okay, sorry about that. Now this means I can represent the views and ideas of the voters here, to the best of my ability, as I'm not constrained by party lines. I also vow to donate half my income to local charities, projects and institutions across the constituency. And as a constituent myself, I want an MP who will always put their constituents first, who is representative of their views, and finally who is open and transparent. This I intend to deliver if elected, and hopefully can then set an example to the politicians. I've made a manifesto which allows the public to contribute any ideas that they may have to a collective vision for the constituency. I believe that I'm a refreshing and exciting change in politics. If voted in, I could be the youngest MP ever elected. This should bring much more focus to the constituency, enabling us to highlight and address our views and values. I believe in progressive, sensible and cooperative politics, as I'm sure most of us do here too. Now our country has a rich history of working in solidarity in times of crisis. We need this now more than ever. Brexit has split an already dividing nation, and we must collaborate and compromise as a whole to unite our country. To fight the inequalities that we face, reverse the years of crippling austerity programs, and reform our economic, political and social structures to a more sustainable and desirable system for the environment and democracy as a whole. This, of course, is a huge national issue, but I believe it is also a challenge that we can battle from the core of our society outwards. This means challenging our attitudes and actions at an individual and local level. We choose who runs our country and represents us. Do we want a leader who has contributed to increasing Islamophobia? Do we want a leader who has repeatedly failed to adequately properly tackle anti-Semitism? Or do we want a leader who simply wants to ignore the vote of 17.5 million people? I certainly don't. And I don't believe that these people and the parties that they represent will be able to heal the bitter and crippling divide in our country. On a more environmental and local focus, I oppose the HS2 and the expressway. Tens of billions of pounds are being wasted on routes that cause significant environmental damage. We should instead invest this money in improving existing infrastructure and increase funding for our vital public services which have been neglected for almost a decade. We should fully electrify the East-West Railway. We should repair the around 8 million potholes which have been ignored since 2010 due to local council cuts. The Local Government Association reported that councils lost 60 pence for every pound in government funding since 2010. How can we possibly expect high quality or even adequate public services with these level of cuts? I don't want a mainstream party here who won't pay attention to us. They will simply see us as another seat. I want real change, as I'm sure most of us do here too. I want representation that will pay attention to our needs and our wants. It's time for progressive, honest and sensible politics. Thank you.
And now Antonio Vitello for the English Democrats.
Before I start, can you all hear me? Okay, my name is Antonio Vitello. I lived in this constituency from the age of 2 until the age of 24. I now live in nearby Leighton Buzzard. I attended Winslow CFE Primary School, followed by Prince's Ridgeford Upper School, so I'm very familiar with the south as well as the north. I was until recently a citizens advice volunteer in Aylesbury, and I have strong objective and moral values, and I'm very much opposed to cultural Marxism. Such that I agree with George Orwell that 2 + 2 do not equal 5, but solely 4 to the exclusion of all others, and sometimes the truth is inconvenient, but just because the truth is inconvenient, that does not mean it is not the truth. I'm strongly opposed to HS2, which is ruining our countryside at the taxpayers' financial expense, and all because some bureaucrat in Brussels wants a perfect straight line between London and Birmingham, which is complete lunacy. I'm also opposed, by the way, to the Cambridge Expressway, which will bring pollution which is harmful to human and animal health. I believe such money could be far better spent on the Oxford to Cambridge Railway link, which will benefit other towns in between Oxford and Cambridge. On to Brexit now. I'm a very strong Brexiteer. I was actively involved in the Vote Leave campaign in 2016 and a former UKIP member. Having studied law at the University of Westminster, I believe strongly in the principle of Magna Carta, and one of the clauses, namely no taxation without representation, and in practice what that should mean is that since we voted to leave, no more taxpayers' money should be going to the European Union. Now, there's two other candidates here who claim to deliver on Brexit, who want Brexit in aim totally. Firstly, the Tories. Now, I don't think the Tories are capable of delivering a proper Brexit apart from bribing Brexit in name only. Okay, firstly, look back to 2016, when David Cameron announced the referendum. He promised whichever way you vote, the government will implement it. What happened the day after he voted to leave? He resigned as Prime Minister. And then we had Theresa May, who was a visible failure. And then second, snapped general election, kicked Brexit down the road. And then we got Boris Johnson, again, kicked the can down the road to the 31st of January. And snap general election, here we all are in this hall tonight. And with regards to the Brexit Party, that's basically a Nigel Farage. When I joined UKIP in early 2016, Nigel Farage was our leader, and he was a very big fan on Article 50. Now, he appointed Gerard Batten, who later became leader, to research how we should actually leave the European Union. And in Gerard's research, he discovered that Article 50 is just a trick to keep us locked into ever closer union, and so Brexit never happens or we get bribed with Brexit in name only. Now, the perfect way we should leave, an ideal way, is to simply, in our own Parliament in Westminster, to repeal the European Community Act of 1972 under our own law, and then we tell them how it's going to work, not listen to how it's been done. And we offer them a trade deal, take it or leave it, and if they leave it, we'll go on WTO terms. And likewise, freedom of movement, etc. We can offer them something. If they reject it, then we can just grant visas if we do need Indian nationals here to work and stuff. And I believe that that's the route we need to go down. We voted to leave. We didn't so hard Brexit, soft Brexit. Nicola Sturgeon was making these arguments about about you can't change your opinion in 2 days before the referendum if you can't change your vote if you vote to leave. I was there, and I think we just need to honour the referendum. It's a simple, hard Brexit, no deal Brexit. That's what we voted for. That's what 17.4 million people voted for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. The next candidate on my right is Greg on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out and giving up your evening, this cold, freezing evening outside. I'm sure all of us on the panel are getting weather hardened as this campaign goes on. I've certainly been doing 25,000 steps a day trying to get round as many people as I humanly can. Now, Buckinghamshire is my home. It's where my wife and I chose to settle down, to bring up our family. We've got a 3-year-old, and just to prove that this election is perfectly timed, we've got another baby on the way on the 5th of January. But it is the place that I also run my business. I've worked for myself for the last 15 years. And I genuinely really want to give something back by being the most local and accessible Member of Parliament possible if I win your trust on the 12th of December, getting my elbows out and really getting things done for our area. And to give you an example of that, I've already managed to shift my own party's policy on the subject of the expressway. One of the first things I did when I was selected as the Conservative candidate on the 20th of October was to take the case against both HS2 and the expressway to the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. He listened, and a couple of weeks ago he came to the Buckingham constituency. He met me at Verney Junction to commit a Conservative government will deliver east-west rail, will provide a good pot of money to improve our existing roads, will install more cycle highways like the one that runs from Wadston to Aylesbury, all, and the key word, and watch the video on my website, instead of that new road, that expressway road. So frankly, I surprised myself being able to move my party's policy as just a candidate, because that doesn't happen very often. But I hope it's a statement of intent about the sort of local MP I will be if you elect me. I mentioned HS2 in there. I'm absolutely opposed to HS2. You know, £100 billion, probably a bill that is rising by the day, coupled with the mass-scale environmental destruction to our countryside, coupled with the fact that it's of no benefit to us and a real questionable benefit to the people in London, Birmingham and Manchester who it's supposed to serve. I am absolutely committed to doing everything I can to stop that utter waste of money and environmentally destructive project. But of course, this election is also about the big national issues. And I, along with the other 633 Conservative candidates standing around the United Kingdom, have absolutely committed, if I'm elected, to supporting the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement and getting that through the House of Commons by the end of January. And the reason that is so important is because the country has become completely deadlocked. Parliament was not functioning, and that's why we're having this winter election. And it's not just a failure to deliver on the mandate that was given by those 17.4 million people in the 2016 referendum, but it's also taking away that vital government time to actually get on with the priorities that I'm sure most people in this room most care about our NHS, and getting more doctors, more GPs, more nurses into our health service with the funding and resources they need, about levelling up our education funding, getting £4,000 minimum per pupil funding at primary and £5,000 minimum per pupil funding at secondary. The school we're sat in now, the Conservative government has already committed to a 9% funding increase for this very school from next year, and it is our ambition to keep school funding rising so that we can provide that world-class education for every child in this country. And of course, fighting crime. You know, as I've gone door to door, there is a serious concern about crime in this country, from our farmers who report the loss of quad bikes and tractors and rural crime, to the county lines drug gangs that prey on our teenagers. That's why I'm so committed to ensuring we do have the police on our streets to fight crime. And lastly, of course, we can only fund all of this if we have a strong economy. In 2010, when David Cameron became the Prime Minister, the coalition government, along with the Liberal Democrats, the British state was borrowing £1 for every 4 it spent. Over the last 9 years, we've shifted that, so the British state is now borrowing £1 for every £35 it spends. That gives us the headroom to be able to start spending again on some of the things I mentioned. But fundamentally, you can only afford these things if the economy is strong, people are in work and paying their taxes.
Hey, Brent, I've noticed exactly.
Done this before.
The next is David Morgan on behalf of the Labour Party. Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming along on, it is a bitterly cold night. This election is about vision and values. It's not just the Brexit election, it's the climate emergency election, the social justice election, the what kind of world do we want for our children election. We stand at a 1945 moment. Despite fears about the costs, the impossibility, the radicalism of Labour's vision, the nation voted in 1945 for real change. They voted for a national health service, a welfare state, a completely new way of doing things, building society that worked for the many, not for the few. And that's worked okay for 70 years. For many people here tonight, university was free, you've progressed further than your parents, own your own home, and are provided for in your older years. Now compare that to our children's lives. Burdened with student debt, work often on minimum wage, 0-hour contracts, can't afford their own home, no provision for their old age. On most health, life expectancy and social criteria, they will be worse off than their parents. And that assumes that there will still be a planet for us to live on. Tackling the climate emergency and building a sustainable society requires us to change our behaviours and how we do things, quickly. Like 1945, it requires a reimagining of how we organise our society. This is what Labour is fighting for in this election. It's been so long since Buckingham has had a contested election that about a quarter of voters have never had a proper electoral choice. A generation of silenced young adults who know their futures depend on fundamental change to save the planet they live on and to make a society that works for them. Now they have a choice. They're voting for change. Women born in the 1950s are voting for a restoration of their pension rights. Out in our pretty villages, hard-working families, squeezed by austerity, rising bills and stagnant incomes. They always wanted to vote Labour, but never bothered because it was a safe Tory seat. Not anymore. Now they have the confidence to vote for who they've always wanted to vote for. Many Green Party supporters are annoyed they have been denied their choice. Like George Monbiot, many recognise that if you want to save the planet, Labour is the only alternative. They will be voting with their conscience for a step in the right direction. These groups and others in our community are going to vote Labour. It doesn't matter what pacts party elites have concocted for them, they will be voting for the change they know we need to tackle the climate emergency in time and to create a just, sustainable society. They don't want the Tories. They want to remain in Europe, but they choose to vote for something, not against something, for a new world that's fit to face the challenges of tomorrow. Like our climate, voting patterns and habits are breaking down. We made outdated assumptions about how people would vote in 2016 and look at the mess that got us into. People can no longer be defined by outdated notions of tribal party politics. We are a collection of communities of differing priorities, but united in voting for change that we know is needed. The climate emergency doesn't give us the time to indulgently vote against something. Restoring social justice motivates us to vote for something. The polls show a tightening of the race between the two main parties and the Lib Dems slipping back. Another hung parliament is on the cards. It's not just a case of stopping the Tories in Buckingham, it's a case of stopping the Tories in Parliament, of keeping the option of a people's vote alive. Tactical voting is always a risk. Regardless of what Stephen believes or says, the Lib Dem leadership have made clear they would support a minority Tory government should Boris slap a referendum on his withdrawal agreement.
Thank you very much indeed. Finally, at this part of the session, Stephen Dorrell on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much. If I may echo my fellow candidates, thanks to you for coming out on a cold December evening. I'm Stephen Dorrell. I was 36 years a Conservative Member of Parliament. I was Health Secretary in John Major's cabinet. From 2010 to 2014, I chaired the All-Party Health Committee of the House of Commons. I left the House of Commons of my own free will in 2015, as I thought to pursue a life outside politics. But I'm now the Liberal Democrat candidate, and I'm also the Remain Alliance candidate here, with the support of the Green Party. And if I may say so, David, although I agree with some significant amount of what you said, I absolutely do think that in an election where the key issue is Brexit, it's disappointing that those who think that Brexit is a major mistake, in John Major's phrase, an historic mistake, have been unable to come together on a broader basis, on the basis that the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have done, to support a single candidate here, to provide the clear option to vote, if you want to pursue Boris Johnson's deal, to vote for Brexit. But if you think that Boris Johnson's deal prejudices our country's interests, to vote for the Remain Alliance candidate. That is myself, with support from the Liberal Democrats and from the Green Party. Why am I so opposed to Brexit? I chair the European movement. The European movement was founded by Sir Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill's remembered for many, many things, but he's not remembered primarily as an economist. He didn't found the European movement because he thought this was a trading arrangement. He founded it as a peace project. When Michael Heseltine speaks in favour of the European Union, he always opens his speeches with the same single sentence. He says, "I was born in the year Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany." In my 5 minutes, I don't intend to enlarge further on the reasons why I think we owe it to ourselves and to our children to take the escape route from the Brexit road crash on which this government is embarked. That's part of the reason why I'm opposed to Brexit. There's a second reason, and it reflects on the fact that I stand in this election with the support of the Green Party. At a time when we're encouraged to think about the climate emergency, the fact that our way of life on our planet, the sustainability of our planet, is undermined by carbon emissions and global warming. Is there any single person in this room who believes that's something we can put right on the basis of a single sovereign nation state of 60 million people on a planet of 7 billion people? Does anybody believe that? Surely, if we are half serious about the climate emergency, that leads inexorably to the proposition that we need to address that issue collectively together on an international basis. So I appeal for your support as the Remain Alliance candidate to preserve the world's most successful peace project and to preserve our capacity to address the climate emergency, and indeed to reflect on the fact that our shared values across the continent of Europe, there's far more that brings us together than that divides us. It's worth reflecting, actually, that at Harvard University, when they were looking this summer for an advocate to stand on a platform at their speech day, at their prize giving, to set out liberal values to an America governed by Donald Trump, who did they choose? Who did they turn to? The answer is the Chancellor of Germany. That, I suggest to you, is a reflection of how far we on the continent of Europe have travelled in 70 years.
Thank you very much. Just within the 5 minutes as well, thank you. Our timing is actually immaculate. We are right on time with the schedule which we prepared. Just let me explain the question session very briefly. I'm very pleased to say that I've been handed a series of questions. They're numbered, so I will follow the numbering on this, so that there's those suggestions that I'm fixing the questions which are coming up. And I have a question, and I'm hoping that the person in the audience has kept a copy. If not, I will read it out. But the first question is from Kate Winning. If you could raise her hand wherever she may be, and the microphone is on its way to you, Kate. At this very second. You kept properly, have you, Kate? Well done. So, Kate, if you'd like to stand up, then we can all see you, if you don't mind. And off you go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and panel. My question is this: dishonesty and dirty tricks have become acceptable in electoral campaigning. How would the candidates restore honesty to our politics?
Thank you. So start off with candidate number 4. This is how it will go.
I agree with the premise of that question. I think our politics has become toxic in some of the debates in recent years. I mean, I'll give a straightforward commitment that I will always be straight with people. If someone asks me a question, I will answer it straightly, and if I can't give you the answer you want, I will still give you the answer that I genuinely believe in. But yes, in politics there have been things on all sides of the debate. You know, the famous Lib Dem bar charts that show they're winning in places that, frankly, they've never really scored very well. And I'll be honest, from my own party, I think it was a stupid mistake to do that whole fact-check thing on Twitter around the first of the leaders' debates. I think what we need in politics is for all of us, and I genuinely believe all of us that put ourselves forward for public office do so for the right reasons, because they want to make their country better, their area better. We might disagree on policy, but I think everyone fundamentally does it for the right reasons. That we have to be straight and honest and give a yes-no answer to a question when it requires a yes-no answer, or a more detailed one based on our own values and principles and beliefs when it requires an answer like that. And if we can get our debate like that, I think we'll be much better off.
Candy, if you can watch Alison at the back, that lady, when you're minutes, I know it's a bit difficult, but if you can watch her, when she will kind of tell you when your minute is up. Okay? The lady at the back, the high-vis jacket.
Thank you. I think the answer is quite simple. You just have to be honest about things and admit when you don't know things and listen to people and accept what they say. And I fear that politics now is being run by consultants who will tell you all the tricks in the book that will put a message out that will knock down your opponents or will make you look good. I think you've just got to be straight down honest. We've got to get rid of all this advice from what I think is the most immoral group in the world, political consultants, who will tell you what works on the evidence that there's been of marketing and sometimes information warfare. You just have to be honest. And unless politicians are prepared to stand up and do that, I'm afraid we're finished.
It's a question which you almost invite us to sound holier than that. And so I'm going to try to avoid that. Simply point to the fact that I've already referred to my own background. I was 49 years a member of the Conservative Party. They changed their view about the European Union, and I changed my party allegiance. Now, that doesn't mean I'm perfect, it doesn't mean I've never made a mistake, but it is an example, I think, of knowing when to draw the line. In politics, I have two propositions. The first is, to build a coalition to do something, you do have to be prepared sometimes, in fact quite often, to compromise. You do also have to know when not to compromise, and that's what I will try to continue to do.
I can tell you that in my own career, I have been a Conservative for very many years, until I suppose, and I fought against the European Economic Community, as it was then, back in the first referendum as a teenager, and took a strong interest in the debates then. And the cause then seemed to be what it is now, the cause of national independence and self-rule. And for many years I felt myself debarred from taking part actively in Conservative politics, because I knew that my core belief was out of sync with the leadership. I'm very glad now that as the things that we feared at the beginning have come to be more generally recognised that the EU is fundamentally a political project for federalism. Opinion has come round, and I find myself in line. But, you know, I can't tell you how to make other people honest. I can just tell you that you as voters and audience have to identify those people who think are telling you the truth.
Well, politicians are a product of their system, the electoral system, and I personally think if we change it to a more proportional representative system, electoral system, such as single transferable vote, politicians will be more honest because they will have to become less polarising and more cooperative and comprehensible approach to politics. It will increase coalitions, but hopefully in the long term this will create a better state of politics, which means that politicians don't have to lie on both sides, which we saw in Brexit. Both Leave and Remain both lied. There's many ways, but I think the electoral system is the key here. We need to change it, and hopefully that can change politicians.
Okay, I think you firstly need to elect politicians who actually believe in the existence of objective right and wrong, and objective truth, and objective right and wrong existence of that comes before in philosophical order before the question of does God exist or not. Now myself, I'm a traditional Catholic. I wasn't raised in Italian faith, in the Catholic faith, although I'm Italian, but I came to it as a convert, and I believe in the Catholic faith because I believe it's the truth, and I became a traditional Catholic, come to reject the Second Vatican Council, etc., because I believe in it, even though it's inconvenient. I might have to go to London to go to Mass or something like that. But basically, you've got to look for politicians who truly believe in the existence of objective right and objective wrong. That's what I would say to you.
Thank you very much. Now, concludes the kind of first session. I've seen people with bits of paper and a pen. I'm looking at you, madam. If you are writing a question, if you could pass it to one of the stewards, and then we'll see if we can incorporate it. Now, Madeleine Smith. Madeleine Smith? Ah, good. Have you got your question there? Oh, you have, because I've got a bit of blank at the bottom. Madeleine, your question.
Looking at a world of climate emergency, minimum wage, zero-hour contracts and unaffordable housing, what would you say to convince someone under the age of 30 that your party offers them the best future?
So we move on now.
Thank you, Madeleine, for your question, and a very serious one about it. First of all, you have to take these issues seriously. Half measures aren't going to be enough. And I think the big difference between the three main parties is about their targets for coming down to carbon neutral position. The Conservatives, 2050, the Lib Dems, 2045, we're saying 2030. And if things are going to change, it means changing behaviours. And if we're going to leave it until I'm 90 years old before things are supposed to happen, then we are finished. For the other issues, again, half measures aren't enough. We need, as I said earlier, to actually lift ourselves to the status of the people in 1945 who said things are badly wrong and now we need to take real measures, not half measures, real measures to address those issues of exploitation of young people and the lack of opportunity which your generation has, which mine and the rest of us here, we were very, very privileged, and we ought to share that privilege with you.
I think someone's trying to get in. Love it, thank you. Now, sorry about that. Steve.
My answer to your question, Madeleine, would be to say that, first of all, the climate emergency does need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. 2045 is better than 2050, but it's still a very long time in the future. What we need to be doing, both on climate emergency, student finance, ensuring that the access to housing, is addressing the need for a successful economy, which is something Greg talks about, but then doesn't follow through to how you deliver it. And the Lib Dems are the only party that is crystal clear that the best economic future, the best way of tackling the environment, the best way of giving people job opportunities is to secure this country's future within the European Union, which gives us £50 billion a year of extra public expenditure capacity to address some of the issues that you identify without the kind of prejudice to the successful economy that I think would come with Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell.
Thank you. Yes, well, first of all, I'm here to speak up for my generation, and I hope that I have a lot of support here in the room, because I can see a lot of people of my generation. Look, the deepest instinct, Madeline, of parents and grandparents is to try to create a good world for their children and grandchildren and to act in their interests. I did see, so it isn't the truth that in some way we're ignoring the priorities of young people. The priorities of young people, of course, aren't always correct. I saw a polling today showing that young people under the age of 24 were predominantly Labour voters, and in each successive age band, the number of Conservative voters, the proportion went up until over a certain age, it was 72% voted Conservative. Now, there's never been a general election where 72% of the electorate voted Conservative. So either non-Conservative voters are dying off faster. That would be a great marketing strategy for the Conservative Party to tell them that. Or, as people get older, they get wiser. And I think that's actually true. As for CO2, it is true that human activity may have changed the carbon cycle slightly, but that's minuscule in comparison with the effect of the Cambrian explosion, which resulted in 15 times today's levels of CO2 leaving the atmosphere.
As the only under 30-year-old here, I understand those troubles as well. Quickly on the wise issue, actually, the more educated people get, the more they tend to vote Labour. The issue is also that young people are less likely to go out and vote, so that's an issue we need to address as well. We could make politics a mandatory subject in secondary school, hopefully that could cure the issues there. On environment, I want to try and cut carbon emissions to net zero within 20 years to 2040-ish. This is very optimistic. I think 2030 is too optimistic, in fact, but if we can start the ball rolling, changing the economic and political structure, it could be possible. Housing also is a huge issue, especially for younger people. The house price keeps rising. I want to try and make subsidies for under 30-year-olds with a stable income. Thank you.
I only turned 31 back in September, so I also sympathise with you. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Barnett formula, but basically it sets out how public services and education can be spent in the UK, and because of the Barnett formula and the fact that England doesn't have its own parliament or assembly, unlike Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, that means that if you live in England, or you have lived in England for the last 5 years, you will spend more on your education, for higher education, accumulate more student debt. Also, access to NHS is also limited. For example, cancer. If you live in Scotland, you get cancer-saving drugs, which could save your life for free. When if you live in England, you have to pay for them or die, or you get free prescriptions in Wales and stuff. So, if you we need our own English Parliament to enable us to vote to severely reduce or abolish the tuition fees in England, just as they are in Scotland. It's simply unfair that Scotland gets free education and we don't.
The climate emergency is the biggest threat facing our entire planet right now, and I'm quite proud of the Conservative government's record. Emissions have actually fallen by a quarter in the UK since 2010. when we've gone entire fortnights without requiring any fossil fuels to power the grid. We've gone entire fortnights with 100% renewables going into the grid. And I would heartily recommend, it's a bit of dry reading, but it's very good reading, the Environment Bill that passed its second reading before Parliament was dissolved, and that we will bring back under a majority Conservative government with a realistic plan to get to net zero by 2050. On jobs, there are 3.6 million more people in work since 2010 in this country, and on low pay, we are committed in our manifesto to introducing a national living wage of £10.50, on top of having already taken the lowest out of tax altogether, raising personal allowances to £12,500 before you pay a penny of income tax. So we very much want a low tax, high wage economy going forward.
Now, I've got an anonymous question which makes it slightly difficult. If somebody wanted to ask about the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway. Hands all out over there. You can give your name as well, please.
Hello, my name is David Rogers. I'm a member of the No Expressway Group. I've been to 3 hustings in the last 3 days, and at those 3 hustings, all 3 Conservative candidates, James Fredrickson, John Howell and now Greg Smith, have claimed credit for grants.
Sorry, this was a question.
It's a question.
No.
For grants tax changing its mind.
Please, we have no party political speeches masquerading as a question. It's a question or it's not a question, right?
All right. My question is to the panel. The review analysis of the Expressway...
I obviously got the wrong question. Sorry, could you sit down, please?
Expressway is also about million houses.
No, the question which I have, which for some reason the person hasn't put their name down for, is what is your party's position on the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway and the 1 million homes proposal? If it wasn't you, is it somebody else who asked that question?
It was me.
It was, we'll answer that question. Thank you. Now, Stephen.
My answer to that question is, it follows on neatly, if I may say so, from the intro to your question, sir, which is that the Liberal Democrats are opposed to the Expressway, opposed at county level, opposed at national level. I am personally opposed to the Expressway for an important reason. I think it reflects a failing in our government that goes well beyond the Expressway as an issue, which is that we have a belief that somehow we have a continuing belief under governments of all complexions that the expert in Whitehall knows better than local communities how to meet the needs of local communities. And the Expressway is a really good example of that principle being developed across Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. And I've heard Greg say that there was a conversion at Verney Junction. I don't believe it. It seems to me that it's an extraordinarily convenient conversion. And this particular road to Damascus appears to have at least 3 byways on it.
Yeah, the expressway isn't needed. The railway, the refurbishment of some of the old railways that were closed at the time of Beeching, between Oxford and Cambridge, and the provision of a line all the way through, is evidently a good thing. And getting freight onto rail rather than onto the roads is a good thing. The road is just a means of creating additional traffic. It's not needed. The economic argument has not been made for it, and it would be the excuse for and would create a lot of additional housing in what is, I think, a suboptimal placing for additional housing, destroying large parts of the beautiful countryside. Worst of all, the planning process has been so appalling, it's cast a planning blight with the different options over large parts of Buckinghamshire.
So I'm of course also against the expressway. I think the recent estimation is over £5 billion. That's ridiculous. We can use this on potholes, on already existing infrastructure, on the east-west railway, on cycle path systems, and we got £5 billion to spend. Why not also increase local funding and increase devolution towards local institutions, because they know what's best for local towns and cities.
I already mentioned
of it in my 5-minute speech. I'm strongly opposed to it. In fact, I've signed a petition for the No Expressway myself, and for the same reason, it's a complete waste of money, and I also agree it should be spent on the East-West Railway, and you can put freight on the railway, and as I understand the laws of physics, it moves a lot more energy efficiently on the rail than it would on the road with all the resistance. But yeah, yes, I'm completely against it.
Well, I spoke about this in my opening remarks, and I'm delighted that you've been to 3 hustings, sir, and you've heard my excellent colleagues John Howell and James Frederickson talk about this. Indeed, they found out about the change of policy from me when I phoned them up a few weeks ago. Actually, this is a really serious issue. This road is a crazy idea that would plough through our countryside. And I went and I made the case to the Secretary of State for Transport. I badgered him and his special advisors every day until I got him to change tack. And I think that is the best way a politician can be, that when something's wrong in their area, they get their elbows out, they make the case internally within their party, and they effect change. That is what I've done on the expressway, and now I want to move on to the bigger mountain to move of HS2 and stop that too.
Interestingly enough, on the BBC at 6:30 today, James Frederickson is also laying claim to having spoken to hiccups first. With Labour, we can now say that there will be no expressway, because our shadow transport secretary said no way would a Labour government sanction or permit this to go ahead. You don't solve climate change by building a bright, shiny new motorway. If we're going to tackle climate change, we have to tackle this. The immediate answer, let's put a new road in. We need to be thinking about the alternatives. How can we encourage people not to be going on motorways and polluting the atmosphere? And the urgency of it is shown by the approach of the Conservatives. We've seen the approach, leave it to the market. No, we've got to look at this climate emergency, we've got to take immediate steps, we've got to look at the alternatives, and this is a distraction from that. And the housing, again, market-led, developer-led. We actually need to look at what the need is and meet the need, not what developers think they can make the most profit for. So I think if you really want this, don't trust in a review that could go either way after the election. Don't trust in, with all respect, you're not going to be forming a government after this. You will be part of an alliance.
Don't take them for granted.
Well, it would be nice to see you double your numbers, but that's still not going to be in a position where you can take the decision. Let's be honest about it, it's going to be a Conservative-led coalition or it's a Labour-led coalition.
Majority.
With Labour, you know that this is going no further.
There's still a 10% lead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, the next question is from Robin Farragher.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. 3.5 years has passed since the referendum. We know a lot more about the benefits and disbenefits of Brexit. We've got 3 years of new voters since the referendum. Should voters be asked again? Thank you.
Since the delay in putting an Article 50 application was agreed by everybody more or less, and some people said it should have been longer after the referendum, since the 2-year negotiation process was baked into Article 50, it's a little bit hard a few months after the end of that period to be saying, oh, several years, 2 or 3 years have passed, there might be some new voters, therefore we should vote again. No, because on that principle, there could never have been a vote which wouldn't be voted again. We had a referendum in 1975. It's perhaps a once-in-a-generation event. We've had one now. I can think of nothing more divisive or more unfortunate and more anti-democratic than to hold another vote.
So I was one of those voters. I was 16 at the time. However, I do believe that we should leave the deal, simply because I just think it's the best way to come together as a country. I think if we simply remain as the Liberal Democrats want to, it would be a disaster. I think if we also have the set, this is going to go right, but if there is a coalition, I would support a second referendum because it would again have deadlock in Parliament and nothing would be done. So if there's a coalition, I support a second referendum. However, if there's a conservative majority, I support a deal.
Yes, it's a different model question. A short answer, I believe, is no. And the reason being is that, let's say we've left the European Union, we invoked the European Union Act 1972 and had a hard Brexit thing, the no-deal Brexit. Then should we then, in 3 years' time, have a referendum about whether to go back into the European Union? Alternatively, if we had voted to remain back in 2016, should we keep having referendums every 3 years until we until we decide to leave, and then if we leave, till we keep our referendums? It's an ongoing cycle. But that also raises other questions. Is 5 years fixed-term Parliament too long? Should we not have a 3-year fixed-term Parliament or 1-year fixed-term Parliament? Where do we draw the line?
A 1-year fixed-term Parliament. Wow. How does everyone feel about a general election every year? Seriously, before anything else, I believe in democracy. Our democracy is so precious to all of us. People have died for us to have the right to vote. And no matter how you voted in the referendum, and within my friendship circle, both within the Conservative Party and without, many of my closest friends campaigned just as passionately for Remain as I campaigned for Britain to leave the European Union. There was a result. 17.4 million people remains the biggest mandate given ever in our democratic history. And I really worry about what would happen to the fabric of our society if somehow a perceived elite turns around and says to the 17.4 million people, sorry, you were wrong, we're doing it again. We've got to respect that democratic mandate that was given, and we've got that in the form of Boris Johnson's deal.
We have to bring this to a swift and clean end. 3 years ago, a decision was taken and Parliament has been unable to deliver. What Labour is putting forward is that we come into power, within 3 months we negotiate a new deal. I think we can do a better deal than Johnson. May's deal was better than Johnson's. Then we have a referendum on a specific deal, not a sort of general feeling, do we like Europe, do we not, do we want to give David Cameron a bloody nose, or whatever. A specific deal, or the option to remain. We've had, by the time we get to there, we will have had 2 general elections. Democracy is often returned to. But we give people that deal, and whatever that deal is, the British, the government will respect that. On a personal matter, I, with Stephen, will be arm in arm arguing for Remain. But it is your decision, and on a specific deal, no vagueness, if you want it, and no Brexiteer should be afraid of that referendum. If they are afraid of it because they think that they're going to lose their Brexit, well, I worry about them. That referendum on a specific deal, and the British people will choose, and that brings it to a swift and a clean end, and we can get on to the other priorities that we need to face.
The short answer to your question, should we have another referendum, is yes. I'm refer to the fact that I chair the European movement. We're one of the people behind the People's Vote campaign. So we've been campaigning for a People's Vote for the last 2 years. Let me set out slightly greater length why. I refer to the fact I was a Tory MP throughout Mrs Thatcher's premiership. I worked during that time with Jim Pryor, with Michael Heseltine, with Peter Walker, with Peter Carrington from around here. All of those people, you will notice, have one thing in common. They would not have described themselves as Thatcherites, and certainly were never thought of by Margaret Thatcher as Thatcherites. But despite the fact I'm not a Thatcherite, there's one of many things she said, but one thing in particular in this context she said, which I remember. She said, referendums are the device of dictators. And I think in this debate, we now understand what she meant. We're told it's no longer democratic for us to campaign for what we know is in this country's interests. That is the denial of democracy. Democracy is not an event on a single day in 2016. Democracy is a process that calls government to account. This government is leading Britain down the wrong route and should be held to account through elections. That's why we're here.
Caroline Stonham. Thank you. And this is to Net.
Many young people think that climate change is more important than Brexit. In view of the fact that we don't have a Green candidate, what practical policies would you introduce and when?
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much. I also hold that view. The environment is the number one issue here. There are certain things we can do. We can build water fountains in town and cities. You see this in Italy, for instance, all over Rome, but everywhere. You can create a tax on single-use plastics. I think the Conservative government want to introduce in 2023 for 30% or less recyclability. We need to increase funding for electrifying railways, increase funding in automobiles which are hybrid or fully electrified also. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think what we need to do is we need to focus on the real environmental issues that actually affect us as human beings and, of course, animal life as well, and the flora and fauna. And that is to focus on the actual problems with pollution and not get worked up about this climate change, and also not ignore the medieval warm period. Climate change is part of a natural cycle, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to have some serious scientific discussions, not political discussions in the name of not politically correct, so-called scientific discussions. We need real scientific discussions about and look at the what evidence we can get from the medieval period.
I think there are a lot of practical steps that the government absolutely needs to take on this, a lot of which are outlined in our manifesto and in the Environment Bill I spoke about earlier. Clearly, a major step has got to be, and David sort of alluded as if it was all a market solution we were offering. It's not at all. It's actually massive government intervention and putting subsidy into industry to come up more quickly with the technology that will make our cars cleaner, that will make our planes and trains and ships a lot cleaner to operate on a day-to-day basis. Also about the way we generate our electricity. I spoke earlier about having whole fortnights where the grid is powered 100% by renewables. Well, we need whole years where the grid is only powered by 100% renewables, and that's going to take a lot of government intervention to work with the energy companies to make sure that is actually happening. So I would start very much with government intervention, which is an odd thing for a Conservative to say often, but government intervention, as our Environment Bill sets out, to work with industry.
Caroline, the answer is to tackle the issues. Making cars and aeroplanes, etc., are only part of the answer. We've actually got to change our behaviour. Instead of travelling, we need to work as far as possible from home. This is why we've put forward this free broadband. It's not about getting better Netflix. It's about enabling people to meet over the internet rather than travelling by plane or by car. The east-west rail needs to be no longer the Cinderella of all this. It needs to be central. We need to take it seriously and not still be arguing about whether we turn from level crossings into bridge crossings in the route as it goes through the Milton Keynes area. We need to get away from developer-led housing and actually looking at our needs and doing it. And the reason that we are setting very challenging targets, it's only by setting those challenging targets that we will get the innovation to make things change. Great things have happened in this county because of the force of what's coming up. Bletchley Park, for example, we saw the flowering of mathematicians there solving problems because they had to. They didn't have years to do it with. We need to do the same thing. Issue to everyone the challenge. How can we have a world where we are not going to destroy it within the lifetime of people in this room? Half measures, no point.
I agree, half measures and no point. What we need to do, surely, if we're going to deliver the objective of reducing carbon emissions and reversing global warming, incidentally, not just getting to zero carbon emissions, but getting to the point where we're absorbing carbon back into the surface of the globe. If we're going to get there, we need to understand where the carbon emissions come from, first thing. They come from our transport system, they come from our houses that are not properly insulated, they come from the way we generate electricity. So we need to do an analysis of where the carbon emissions that cause the global warming come from. And then what we need to do is to develop a set of plans as to how those carbon emissions are going to be reduced and what steps we're going to take to capture carbon and stick it back into the Earth's crust. Now, those are all relatively clear steps we need to take, and what we're engaged on is a massive, not merely national, but global change program, which has to take people with them. So we need to demonstrate how people are going to earn their living, how they're going to live in warm homes, how they're going to still be able to travel. We don't want to be returning to a world of medieval villages. So we need a transition program to deliver this. I'm sorry, this is quite a big subject. Deliver a sustainable, deliverable program within the most urgent timescale possible. Thank you very much.
I drive for hybrid vehicles. I dig on and explore for the metals that are essential for electric batteries. I believe in progress technology, and I think also we should be getting rid of diesels because of the NOx gases they let off. One of the countries I visited in Africa is Kenya, which has abolished plastic bags completely, and one thought that it might not be possible, but in fact it's worked. We should do something similar here. When we come on to talk about climate emergencies and CO2, I have to dissent. The essential of the scientific method is that experiments should be replicable. The key elements in the supposed proof by some scientists of CO2 increases, this data has not been given to independent researchers who want to check the data. It has been withheld from them. That should make it very suspicious to start. I've mentioned about the Cambrian explosion, CO2 levels were 15 times current levels, they came down. Every single ice age, when we entered into it, CO2 levels were higher than they are today. And also, CO2, it lags temperature, it doesn't lead it. And that's because of a very well-known phenomenon whereby rising temperatures release CO2 from the sea. If it worked both ways, then you would logically have ever-increasing temperatures. Think about some of these things. Don't trust it when people ask you to just take arguments from authority. That's what Galileo was asked.
Of all climate scientists agree, 99%. Well said, well said.
There has been global warming before, but it's never been this fast. The problem with now is that there is no time for our wildlife, our natural world to adapt. That's the key question here. It has happened before, but not at this speed.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question is from Heather Joy.
Yeah, my question's quite short. And you can see probably why. What would you do to make food banks redundant?
About that is the good part of that is we need to solve the benefits problem with the job centres, the sanctions for silly little things which are completely stupid. I don't think completely make it redundant, but there's quite a lot you can do. The benefit system under the Tories, I used to work with systems advice. I know about the caseload of systems advice and the disability assessments which have been turned down by so-called healthcare professionals, merely newly qualified nurses who don't just completely disregard medical knowledge, and also the sanctions you get from job centres of things like not applying for a job because the application form didn't arrive from the employer in time. So we need to sort out the benefit system and scrap the current benefit system that we have under the Tories. That's all I say to that.
Well, of course, first of all, you clearly volunteer or working or run a food bank and manage a food bank, and can I say thank you for what you do. And clearly it is a human tragedy if someone has to go to a food bank to get food for their family table. And the way I think that we can most successfully get out of that is to ensure people have money in their own back pocket in order to buy food for themselves. And that is why we are so focused on Party of ensuring there's a strong economy. So when you've got a strong economy, businesses are investing, they're creating jobs, 3.6 million more people in work than 2010, the lowest unemployment rate since 1974. But we've equally got to ensure that what people earn is high enough, and that's why we have pledged for the national living wage to go up to £10.50. We've taken the lowest paid out of tax altogether. I want to keep pushing on that to ensure that it pays to go to work and that there is a job for everybody that wants one. And when we've got a strong economy that can deliver that, I very much hope that food banks will, as you say, become redundant.
We actually have to address the issues, and austerity policies have hit the poorest hardest, and they are the ones that are paying the price for the policies that this government has followed for the last 9 years. And it's not just people out of a job who can't do it. A lot of people are on minimum wages, zero contract hours. They are being exploited in a way that we haven't seen for years. And we have to address those. We actually have to tackle the problems that are there behind food banks. It is an absolute disgrace that in this century that more and more people are having to rely on these. We've got to get the way that the economic structure in this country is set up in a way that benefits all, not just the best off.
Interestingly, you got from Greg one half of the answer, and you got from David the other half of the answer, but neither of their parties will deliver both halves of the answer. But it is absolutely true, I agree with Greg, that you won't deliver sustainable living standards, address poverty, get people out of poverty, unless the economy is working. That's true. But what's also true is that over the last decade, and actually over quite a lot longer, as a society, we haven't succeeded in delivering fair shares from a working economy. And therefore, what's required is social policy that does address the underlying causes of food banks, the poverty that leads to food banks, does address that, but without undermining the capacity of the economy to deliver the economic basis that makes it all possible. Unfortunately, the Tories talk about, and I speak as a former Conservative, always overemphasise the economy. Labour always overemphasises the social justice. It's by bringing the two together that you address the real issue.
I remember when I was young, hearing one leading politician of the day, who had come from a very poor background, indignantly talking about Harold Wilson, the then Labour Prime Minister, who made a speech about how he hadn't had boots when he was young or something. But if he didn't have boots, it was only because he was too big for them. And he said that in the street where he'd grown up, there were actually children running around without shoes. Now, our economic level has gone up a great deal. And in fact, this is a global phenomenon. There's a couple of excellent Danes who've written a book and go around, I think they used to work for aid agencies, and go around and tell people all the statistics, which astonish everybody. How much poverty has been alleviated, how much medicine has improved, how much female education has improved in almost every country in the world, which is why, except in situations of actual civil breakdown, something like Ebola can be coped with. We have to rely on increasing levels of prosperity to solve the problems of the very poor or those who don't have enough food. And the more prosperous society we can make it, then the better we're able to solve these things.
Has nobody on the panel ever heard of the wealth gap?
Maybe you can help us.
I want to reverse years of Tory government. One way we can reform universal credit, which is especially cruel for people with disabilities. I want to increase the minimum wage, which is far too low and it's especially difficult for people with children. I also want to increase the personal allowance so that people at the lowest of society don't have to pay tax until a higher bracket of income.
Thank you. We've now actually done a complete round, and we are doing very well because the candidates are keeping their questions short. We have got more questions, though, you'll be pleased to hear. I've got a question here. It's from Kathy. Kathy Maynard. Oh, yes. Could you, in your fourth word, just be candidate, please? Thank you. We don't want specific questions to a candidate. It would get very boring.
Thank you. As a secondary teacher in a large secondary school in Buckinghamshire, I'd like to know how your party will improve support for the increasing number of students suffering with mental health issues.
Come back to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you for that question. Mental health is something that's very close to my heart. Largely because of the number of family members on the right side of the family who actually suffer with particularly depression. And so it's something that if I'm elected, I want to, all politicians tend to specialise in something, they have an issue that they really want to get their teeth into and do something about. And mental health is absolutely, amongst all people, not just young people, except for a secondary school teacher, it's particularly clear in your line of vision. And so I think it's vital that we give mental health the same status as physical health. In recent, many decades, it hasn't had that, and actually it's only in recent times that we've seen mental health spoken of much more publicly, and people who suffer with mental health issues actually not feeling they need to stay in a corner, but come out and ask for the help that they need, and indeed other people, teachers in particular, to spot the signs of somebody that needs that support and help. And I want to be absolutely a champion for us moving at 1,000 miles an hour to make sure mental health has the same status as physical health in our health service.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to agree with Greg. it ought to be given the same status as physical health. And I'm glad to see that there is a growing recognition of the needs of mental health problems across society, but particularly the challenges that young people are facing. And it needs to stop being the Cinderella, something that is done. And I think we can all give examples of where we've seen people not being served by mental health service because it has been the Cinderella. It hasn't had the money put into it. It hasn't been allowed to develop the numbers needed to do it. One of the things in our manifesto, and there is quite a bit in the manifesto, and I'm glad that in our manifesto we have highlighted this issue, that we are looking at ways of tackling this, and one of them is that those in secondary schools should have counsellors in every school, in primary schools, and this problem is hitting kids younger than to secondary school level, that they should have access to people to help them with those problems.
I've spoken this evening quite a lot about one of my other roles in the European movement. In addition to the European movement, I'm also a trustee of a charity called Place to Be, which delivers mental health services in schools up and down the country. And one of the things that's important to me about that is to recognise that it isn't a matter just for the health service. Mental health is, indeed, it has it in common with physical health. Health is something that we enjoy or we don't enjoy in our normal lives. Health is the part of the responsibility of the school. It's nonsense to say that health is for the health service. The health service exists to treat illness, but what we need to develop are more joined up services, so that whether you're talking of the school service or social care, or even something as simple as the library service that's a meeting place within a community, you have a network of provision that delivers provides support for normal life in communities. That's how you deal with both mental health and physical health. It's not just a matter for the National Health Service, and I speak as a former health minister.
There are some areas that I think I know a lot about and can speak for our side, and there are other areas where I know my knowledge is deficient. This is one of the ones where I know my knowledge is deficient. I think that when I was young, some people at university would have mental health issues, the stress and strain of work, but I never saw it at secondary level. And my wife, who was headmistress of a primary school at primary level for many years, I don't think she encountered it from day to day. Problems certainly like autism or slight autism or behavioural problems with young children, but not this. And it seems to have been an issue that has come up in public consciousness or become an issue really quite recently. And I don't know why. There are obviously complex reasons, and it obviously is an issue that needs to be seriously addressed. But all I can say is that if I were in a position to do so, I would try to learn more about it. But I don't know enough at the moment, and that probably applies to most of the people here.
The biggest issue facing this area is the one facing every area: how we face our future and climate change. Because
I think, David, it's a bit like was it the Turner Prize? You've now made it impossible for any of the rest of us to answer that question any differently. But if by any chance from the constituents there wasn't a proposal came forward that had universal support, dealing with the second question first, there is an issue that actually I tried as chair of the Health Committee to get the government to take forward, and which I would like to take forward as a private member, and it concerns the ability of the General Medical Council to take effective steps when the bureaucracy don't deal with doctors who fail their professional standards. And it's a complex question, but there is, I think, a failing in the law around the General Medical Council, which I have argued consistently needs to be put right, and I will continue. If I had the opportunity, I would do it. On the local issue that I would focus on, it's actually one that's a huge issue, not just in Buckinghamshire, but across the country. And that is the priority that I would like to see devoted to the development of effective, more powerful local government. I think, as I've already said in one answer this evening, we live in a grossly over-centralised society where too many decisions are taken by bureaucrats in Whitehall and then legitimised at Westminster. And what we need to do is to look at, it's around the issue we talked about in the last answer, joining up health, social housing, social care, the range of local public services, so that they're properly accountable. And the introduction of a new unitary Buckinghamshire County Council would be an ideal opportunity to reshape local public services so they're more accountable to the communities they ought to serve.
This is a really difficult question because we might have some local issues. I assume that if one won the ballot, people would come to one and say, what about this and what about that? The thing is that the loudest voices, the most persuasive voices, would probably be from colleagues who had some social ill, or some reform that they were promoting, which everyone could agree, or a lot of people could agree was important, but which they were not in a position to take forward because they hadn't won the ballot. And I think that quite often that does happen. I mean, I think a colleague there who's been in the House of Commons for a long time would confirm that people who win the ballot often take other people's causes forward. If there were a local issue, then there would probably be, you wouldn't be talking about something like cancelling HS2 because that's a government decision and wouldn't be handled in this way. There are lots of small things that could be done. You'd have to try and find out what issues local people have in their minds as the point has been made before. I don't have anything. If I were being completely selfish and a very, very small reform, it may have been done already. It was something that affected us once, which was the neighbouring church. The owners of a particular field had inherited the liability to repair the church. And this could suddenly hit an innocent freeholder who bought a house, and that should be abolished.
It's been reverted back to the church. It's been reverted back.
It's been reverted back. There you see, it's been done already.
As an independent candidate, I'm extremely flexible and I'm not constrained by party lines, of course. This means that I can hear as many views as I can from the constituents and put forward what we want. I, of course, want to increase funding for local government and increase devolution of powers. I also vow to donate half my income to local charities, projects and institutions across the constituency, so I'm devoted to this. But if there's to be one bill specifically, I would want speakers to automatically resign their seats to avoid this happening again. But it's a surplus seats from the by-election.
Although I don't enjoy quite exactly the same liberty as Ned does an independent, nevertheless, English Democrats are a small party. We have no whips in the House of Commons, unlike Labour and the Tories, or even the Lib Dems, as I understand it, got no whips at all in Parliament. So I'm also quite free to represent you whatever you want. But if there's only one issue I'd choose, well, difficult to say. There's freedom. Again, I want to approach you with my constituents, but I'd say probably top three would be abolish HS2, abolish the expressway, and the East-West Railway, although I probably could squeeze both the expressway and the East-West Railway into one bill, abolishing the expressway and bringing the East-West Railway in its place. Although our party chairman is a solicitor, Robert Tilbrook, and while I'm here to represent you, I would use what resources I have within my party, wherever I've got my party,
or in or outside the party to help me to serve you, my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I came to this Hustings tonight, I see an old friend around the corner in Haddenham for a coffee before the Hustings, and we were talking to his kids, and they said the most important thing they wanted to see in Haddenham was a family-friendly restaurant to have tea in the evening, but I don't think that is the most important local issue with respect to my friends' children. Actually, I think the biggest issue that has affected not just Haddenham, but actually so many of our villages across Buckinghamshire has been the number of houses that have been built. And I've been clear throughout this campaign that I think the 27,500 homes that Aylesbury Vale District Council have given planning permission to in recent years is frankly, well, probably too many, but certainly enough. And with tens of thousands of acres in our towns and cities around the whole United Kingdom, I include Aylesbury in this, with brownfield sites, old industrial units, disused railway sidings, I think that is where government needs to intervene in order to say that's where we need to build the homes that our country needs first and protect our countryside. And in order to do that, to take that local issue forward to the private members' bill ballot, I would actually like to see house building targets taken away from central government and the power given back to our local councils and therefore our local communities who elect them to decide.
We will revert just to the 1 minute answers now. We just squeeze in one last question. And the question comes from Jonathan Bellicott. Jonathan? I haven't gone home already. Oh, yeah.
This one. We hear a lot about the NHS and very little about social care in local communities. Would the candidates comment on how they would focus on local community care?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with your question. Every government from 1997 onwards has promised to reform the funding of social care. It was a promise made by the Blair government, it was a promise made by Cameron, it was a promise made famously by Theresa May, and it lasted a week in her case in the 2017 general election. And that, of course, reflects the fact that it's a genuinely difficult question, how you secure proper funding of high-quality social care, by which I don't just mean residential care, I mean care support for people to live at home, and it links also directly with social housing, and the issue that we regularly deal with in the health service of rising demand through A&E departments and through GP surgeries for access to the NHS. Too much of it arises because we don't have proper preventative interventions through social care and social housing. So the question that you raise, it's a subject for a Royal Commission, Your Honour.
Thank you. I think the Royal Commission is an excellent idea. In the 19th century, there was a Royal Commission of universities, Oxford and Cambridge, even though they were private, and many of the great and good across society came together and tried to work out what should be done. The problem with many of the commissions that have been set up in recent years is the governments have set them up to expecting the answer yes to some particular reform they've set their heart on, and it hasn't genuinely been people of real distinction. I think that the problem of social care in an aging population is so big that we need to have something like that, because we need to build a consensus that in a world where the demand for health is infinite, and you have therefore increasing demands on the health service and the population is aging, we have to decide how we are going to allocate spending. And if it means that spending has to be higher, there has to be a consensus on it, and I don't think it can be done on a party basis.
Thank you.
So, with the Conservative government and the terrible austerity programme, cuts have been made all over the NHS, and I want to increase the funding for it, which will improve social care across the board. I'd also like a reformative agenda where representatives from all across NHS can reflect on past errors, provide ideas of increased efficiency, better communication, and further integration between hospitals, and hopefully this will strike the way for improving social care.
Thank you. Antonio? I'm sorry to sound repetitive, but that is the truth. It all comes back to the Barnett formula and the way public services are funded in England, as well as education. With regards to the NHS, though, I can be a little bespoke. There's a lot of red tape in the NHS and a lot of outsourcing to the NHS Business Services Authority, which, of course, is a big overhead. Cut that out and manage it themselves. Also, with regards to stoppages of medical supplies, for example, screws for a brace or something, then that is something which typically it is sometimes ordered at the last minute. A few screws that cost pence, but they spend a lot of money on next day delivery. And again, having things in stock would be another approach to take. There's a lot of common sense approaches which could be taken in the NHS to save money and therefore to better use what's saved to further invest in the NHS and to improve the services. And that is, of course, in addition to the underfunding of the NHS by the Barnett formula.
Thank you, Antonio.
This is probably one of the biggest questions in British politics right now. And I'm very pleased that in our manifesto we've set out number one commitment for those that do find themselves in need of residential care. As my own grandparents in their late 90s have just found they've had to give up independent living, that we absolutely do not want anyone to be in a position where they have to sell their home in order to fund that care. That's something Boris Johnson said on the steps of Downing Street when he first became Prime Minister in the summer, and we've repeated in our manifesto. I think one of the most important things, and it's been alluded to on this panel already, that we can do quickly, but sadly actually governments of red and blue have been talking about it for a long time but not really landed it, is getting this integration between the NHS and councils' adult social care departments to actually work in tune, because there is a massive scale of duplication of NHS workers as well as council social care workers, essentially visiting the same homes and doing the same job, and we've got to get that right first.
Thank you. Yeah. It would be nice if we could have a short, easy answer to this, but we've actually got to think how these services are properly set up and are meeting things. At the moment, they're working against each other. We're having hospitals. The beds are being blocked because there isn't the social care for people to go. I know it from my own family that really we've got to think big, and tinkering with the system isn't being enough. A Royal Commission too long. We've really got to put our best brains to it and start looking for immediate answers so that we can start taking out the inefficiencies that exist in the system.
Well, that finishes the question and answer session. What we will now do is have a closing address by each of the candidates, starting in the reverse order, so starting at my right, your left, with Stephen. 2 minutes, please.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I've enjoyed listening again to all my fellow candidates. And every time I listen to Ned Thompson from Buckingham University, I think, Ned, you're a natural recruit to the Liberal Democrats. In your opening statement, you said open, transparent, refreshing and exciting, progressive, honest and sensible. And I can think of no better collection. And in addition to that, you specifically, and the serious point I want to make, because it hasn't come up except from you this evening, you made the case for electoral reform, for a reform of our political system. Regularly said that we are where we are in 2019 because our politics has failed, our politics has broken. There are the majority of the electorate look to Parliament and they do not find their point of view being expressed articulately within Parliament. That is a failure of politics, and it's the second thing that I look for as a result of this election. The first thing I look for is a people's vote, is a new resolution of the Brexit process, because I think Brexit has been a fiasco. I also think it's a distraction. It's interesting, isn't it, that as the evening has worn on, we have actually got to talking about the real issues of politics. We end up talking about social care, we talked about education, we talked about the issues of environment and planning within communities in Buckinghamshire. But in truth, nobody in the political system is devoting any time at all to those issues because the whole thing is distracted by Brexit. And what the Tories say is that means we must get Brexit done. And that is the most dishonest slogan of them all.
I know that I am not as polished as some of the candidates you have to choose from. In speech, perhaps more Clement Attlee than an Iron Bevan. But don't let that blind you to my passion and commitment. I've made a career studying and promoting around the world backbench scrutiny of executive. I will hold Jeremy Corbyn to account in the same way that Jeremy held Tony Blair and every other Prime Minister to account. Leaving the EU is so wrong for our country and for our children's future that I will continue to fight it with every breath in my body. We have no time to waste saving the planet. Tackling the climate emergency is priority number 1, 2 and 3. Without a planet, all other social, health, public policy is meaningless. We need to get it sorted by the 2030s, not 2045, not 2050, now. Cancelling the expressway is what Labour's vision for the future looks like. It's not enough to be tough on one project, we need to be tough on the causes of such projects. We need a new way of doing things that involves the community in delivering long-term public benefits, rather than a developer-led process serving short-term profit at the expense of our environment. I have a radio show in Milton Keynes advising people how to use the planning and other political processes. I will bring that passion and experience to working with groups across our community. Fixing our society, giving our children a chance to shape their own lives on a planet they can live on. This is a vision worth fighting for. Voting with my conscience for my values of social and environmental justice. This is our 1945 moment, a chance to vote for a future fit for the 21st century and be part of it. Vote for hope for the next generation, for what you know is right and just.
Thank you, David.
I think there are two realistic results from this general election across the country. There's either going to be a Conservative government that puts through the Prime Minister's deal, gets us on to negotiating the free trade deal, not just with our friends on the continent of Europe, but also with the whole world, and can then, as a government, refocus on the things that matter to all of us, the 33.9 billion extra for our NHS, the 6,000 more GPs, 50,000 more nurses, the 20,000 more police, levelling up school funding. Well, you've heard it on the media, you've heard it all in the media. These are the things that on the doorsteps of this constituency and talking to friends around the country are genuinely coming up. Or there's going to be some sort of Jeremy Corbyn, hard left, pseudo-Marxist government, which frankly, I think should scare all of us. So, I'm ready to hit the ground running. This is my home, this is where I am so passionate about. It's where, as I said earlier, my wife and I chose to settle down and bring up our family. I want to be a genuinely local Member of Parliament, getting my elbows out, making the changes that we need, like I've already shown my commitment to in shifting my party's policy on the expressway. So let's get all of this done, and let's move forward in a really positive way, believing in this great country and this great constituency of ours.
Thank you very much. Let's face it, I'm probably the most right-wing candidate here tonight, and I'm like, Marmite, you either like me or you hate me. I'm trying to sum up what I stand for. I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. I want proper Brexit, not a rhino. I don't think the Tories are that conservative anymore, albeit I do have a very good friendship with Greg so far in this campaign. I strongly oppose HS2, I strongly oppose Expressway. I believe we should put the East-West Railway back in and improve towns such as Winslow. I believe we should abolish the Barnet form and have an English Parliament so we get better funding for England for our public services and schools. I think we need to make science more scientific. Not only do the Conservatives need to become more conservative, but science needs to become more scientific. And, you know, we should, okay, yes, we can't capture all the information of that from the medieval period. We can't go back in time and put, you know, sensors up and stuff like that. But we can ask the question, how can we analyse what we do have recorded in these various, what we do have, and it might not be able to do too much. But that's a question I think we need to ask. Finally, I'd like to finish with a thought. Someone mentioned 99% of scientists all agree about global warming. Well, if 99% of people believe that not only 2 and 2 are 4, but also 2 and 2 are also 5, 15 and 5 million, does that make that 95% right? In short, is truth objective or subjective? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you all for coming here. Fantastic. Also, thank you for Stephen for the kind words. This vote is basically, what do we want here? Do we want just a simple voice piece for Buckingham of a party? No, I don't want that. I want something new. I'm for this constituency, I'm for local issues, and hopefully you will let me as your MP. Thank you.
I travel to many countries in Africa because of my work, and I speak to people, and they talk about the struggle for independence that they often have, and their desire for self-rule, even if it was at the expense of some temporary prosperity. And then I say, yes, we are trying to get self-rule in Britain too. We want self-rule. It's the same thing. If you can have it, we should have it. And they say yes. And when I go to countries in Asia, I see another issue which happened both in China and in India, which is with rapid economic growth, the cities and the middle classes there became very prosperous, and other parts of the country got left behind. The gap became too big, and they had to slow it down. The effect of the free movement, and Boris and Gove have spoken in favour of immigration carrying on at a high level, even if we leave the EU. The effect of this has been that while people in the southeast have become richer and more prosperous, had easier access to staff, and as Stuart Rose, when he was running the Remain campaign, said, if we leave the EU, wages will go up. The poor people in unskilled and manual jobs, and people in the north very often, have found life a struggle. They have not got more prosperous at all. We have drawn away the rich and prosperous from the poor and insecure. And one of the ways in which we can reunite the country after the shock of seeing how people responded to that in the Brexit vote is by not just Brexit, but also an immigration policy that doesn't bring in too many people with then the strains on housing, house prices too high for our children, strains on health services, on education services, demands for more funding, and all the other problems we've come to see. In the end, it is about self-rule. And as Charles Moore said, the battle of the free trade deal will need to be fought quite early in the next Parliament. If it starts to go wrong, the Brexit Party will rightly be back.
Thank you. Well, that concludes this evening. And I do hope you've all enjoyed this third husting we've had in Haddenham. I would like, on your behalf, to thank all the candidates for coming along this evening. They've all got busy schedules, and I think we all appreciate that all 6 of them made the effort to come to Haddenham. And so if you could show your appreciation. One last thing, I know this might sound a bit patronising, but really, if you don't win this time, I think we'll all be watching your future with great interest.
just want to make a... Yeah,
I just wanted to say thank you very much to Brian Bowman for